This is Storytelling for Photographers. Welcome to episode 2. In the last episode, we looked at how to sketch out a story, and then how to use that story to help with our composition and our posing. Today, we're going to dig deeper into that compositional aspect. I don't mean we're going to be talking about how you should just blindly follow the rule of thirds. Kind of the opposite, actually. We're going to be looking at why our brains react to certain visual compositions and how you can use that knowledge to guide viewers through your photos so that they see elements in a specific order. How does composition actually work? Why are we even affected by how a photo is visually organized? Classical composition appeals to our brains for a couple of reasons. The first is symmetry. Our brains love symmetry. We're more attracted to people with symmetrical faces, for example. But this craving for symmetry extends to foods, to spaces, and of course to scenes and photos. Hand a child a camera and their first instinct is to create a center-weighted symmetrical composition. That's a composition with a reflective symmetry. The second reason that classical composition appeals to our senses is because it arranges the elements in a photo in a way that our brains can easily process. Here's an analogy I like for this. When you read a blog, if the author has followed grammatical guidelines, that blog is going to be easy to process or easy to read. It's the same with composition. Following compositional guidelines will make your photos easier to mentally process. But there's more to composition than just making something visually appealing. Let's go back to that blog analogy. The author, assuming they're skilled enough, can also manipulate the way we feel. They can play on our emotions, and you can do the same with composition, which is pretty cool. I find the best way to teach this is with a theory called visual weight. Whenever we look at a photo or any scene, our unconscious mind will create an ordered list of what elements it thinks are important. And then our conscious mind is just going to run through that list sequentially. Visual weight theory organizes those elements into categories. The idea is that when composing a photo, we can actually use these categories to exert some control over this otherwise unconscious process. But how does this help with storytelling? It helps by letting you link storytelling elements with visual elements. So, say you have two characters. One's a hero, the other a less important secondary character. Visual weight theory allows you to give more visual importance to the hero, so that anyone viewing the photo instantly knows the relationship and the hierarchy between these two characters in your photo. Does that make sense? Don't worry if it's still a little hazy, I'll be giving plenty of examples. For now, let's look at how we can give that hero more visual weight. You can make your hero bigger, because the bigger something is in the frame, the more visual weight it has. Check out this example. In it, the female character was the heroine of our story. The male was just this secondary character who was there to guard her. So in the composition, the heroine is the biggest element in the frame, which makes narrative sense. Now, do you see how these two concepts, storytelling and visual weight, start meshing and working together? I do this in a lot of my photos. So it's easy to identify the main character or the main action I'm trying to get across to the viewer. It's easy because your subconscious is doing it for you. An element in focus has more visual weight than an element out of focus. I use this a lot in conjunction with size. The category is pretty intuitive really, because it mimics the way our eyes work in real life. We focus in on what we want to see. The rest of our field of view is out of focus. At the moment, the camera's in focus. Everything else to me is out of focus. And when you take a photo and focus on an element, you're making that decision for your viewer. You're literally telling them, this is important. Our brains are hardwired to detect faces. The instinct is so strong that you can compose a photo with a tiny human figure and still be pretty confident that a viewer is going to zero in on it. Because of this instinct, human figures carry a lot of visual weight in a composition. Faces evoke an even stronger reaction. We don't just react to a face, but what the face is actually looking at. Infants as young as 3 months old will follow the eyes of those around them, and this works in photos too. Incidentally, this is why that rule of thirds composition, the one with the person staring off into space, into empty space in your frame, is so visually appealing, because the directionality of that gaze infers meaning, and it draws us in. We are curious as to what that person is looking at, or what they're thinking, what's on their mind. Which brings us nicely to leading lines. Leading lines, if you studied composition at all, you'll have heard of these. A leading line can be a visible line, or an implied line, like the gaze we were just discussing. Those implied lines can be a great way to establish, say, a connection between two characters. If they look at each other, there's that line between their eyes. Visible lines can be used to show where an individual is going or coming from, like in this example. Leading lines can also be used to draw a viewer through a composition, into a composition, or out of one. This is why they have visual weight, because they influence the way you move through a photo and the way you understand elements in a photo. Lines are fundamental to composition, as they can also create emotional tension based on their orientation, their position. But while that's interesting, it's definitely a lesson for another day. Your subconscious gives a lot of attention to high contrast areas in a photo. A high contrast area is where there's a strong difference between something dark and something light. So a silhouette is a great example of a high contrast area. These areas have strong visual weight because they are easy for your brain to process. Look at these two photos. Which one do you think your brain can process faster? It's pretty obvious, right? I shoot in the jungle a lot, where it can be really hard to create the contrast around the models so they're easy to spot. So I use smoke to do this. The smoke separates the subject from the background by increasing the tonal contrast. That way they have more visual weight. Last but not least, movement. You've probably noticed that the elements that affect visual weight are often quite primal. We pay more attention to objects that are closer, that are in focus, that are really easy to identify, which is why movement, or the illusion of movement, also has strong visual weight. An object in motion, especially one that appears to be coming our way, is always going to attract our attention more than something static, just like our eyes are attracted to areas of difference in tonal contrast. And movement also happens to be a great storytelling tool, as it shows an action in process. Check this photo out. Had we decided to have the model stand still in the photo, it would have said less. By adding movement, we're adding to that narrative. The person is not just holding a spear, they're actively hunting, they're in the act of hunting. It's way more compelling for a viewer. Okay, that was a pretty full-on theory session. Hopefully this video has given you the tools to go beyond composition, beyond the aesthetic. Instead, you can now create deliberate compositions that will further a narrative, compositions that highlight story elements, characters, actions, and relationships. If you have any questions, please stick them in the comments. I'd love to see them. If you're inspired to try and apply some of this theory, do it and send me the photos. It would be great to see them and to chat with you guys about how you're finding these lessons. Next week, we're jumping into some practical studio work, so a break from the theory. We're going to look at how lighting can help convey the emotions in your stories. It's going to be fun. As ever, if you like this video and want to be notified of future episodes, subscribe, follow, comment, like, send me fire clap explosion emojis, whatever. Do all those things. I'll see you next week.